Mad Mike, this is Sharp Pointy Things. Today we're going to look at some short swords. Historically, short swords are more common than the lengthy ones beloved of movies, and this is not an exhaustive collection, but it's a pretty good cross-section from the past up through the present. Let's bring the camera in. If you saw our Bronze Age episode, this is a reproduction of a Mycenaean Bronze Age short sword. They were pretty much all short at that point. Some longer ones came along, but this is the size you were looking at. For comparison, here's one in progress, a slightly different bronze sword, which we've got about the same length though. I've mentioned before, this is a common length for a couple of different reasons. First of all is metallurgical considerations. Once you get past this, you come to weakness, whether it's bronze or iron. It requires a better grasp of the technology, better shaping, so this is a convenient length for that. It also doesn't waste material. Adding more material takes more raw material. It's a complicated process, and the cost and complexity goes way up. It's also a convenient length because it's about a manipulating length of the human arm. It makes it a lot easier to learn to use these in a relatively short period of time than much longer swords. Even though a rapier isn't any heavier, there's a lot more manipulation required to put the tip where you need it. So this is a common size when you have a mass of men. Now this is a steel impression of a Bronze Age sword. Those were slightly longer. There are similar swords in steel, but this is actually a copy of one that was in bronze, but the people who made these did it in steel. You'll notice the design is becoming more familiar. The grip is a little bigger, and we're getting into swords that people will start to recognize. So that's the leaf blade, and this is a Celtic anthropomorphic sword. And again, this would have been bronze completely originally. This is a very deliberate design here. Yes, this is supposed to look phallic in its symbolism. It's a sword. The jokes are right there. We're still looking at about the same length, and we're going to continue along with that. Single-edged sword of about the same length. This is the Celtiberian falcata. It is a slashing sword primarily used from horseback. The Greeks had something similar, which they used both mounted and on foot. It does bear resemblance to the later kukri, which may have been derived from it when Alexander's troops were equipped with these and went off to the east. Now at this point we're getting into something that most people recognize, and these would have been steel, as would the falcata. This is the Roman gladius. This is the Pompey pattern. They made a lot of these. As they got sharpened, the shape would change slightly. There was a more pointed, slightly leaf-bladed one. There are a variety of styles, but this is what they finally settled on because it was easy to produce and it did the job. You got a large shield, a short sword, close with the enemy, stab, chop, and move forward. Now that style was around for a long time. It's still with us. There were actually swords in the Middle Ages in Germany and Switzerland of a similar shape and style. This is an 1832 pattern French artillery sword. It was a sidearm for artillerists. It was also used for cutting brush, prepping positions, but they could fight with it. The Russians had something similar in the 1850s with a sawback on it, which was became a fairly common thing. But all of these have a similar profile, similar style, similar size, because the pattern works. There's recurring things throughout history as far as implements. Once you have something that works, you stick with it. Moving quite a bit later, this is a copy, it's a reproduction of a Welsh trench sword from World War I. The guard folds, so you can get your hand in there. And yeah, this is for getting in up close and personal with people who are not your friends. And it's even sharpened on the pommel. I imagine jumping into a trench and there's a little guy about 5'6", 5'7", hopped up on adrenaline and fear, and he's swinging this around. It's not something you want to encounter. But same style, same pattern, same usage. Moving forward, this is about 1850. This is a kinjal. It's also the kama, which is single-edged. These are a Persian Caucasian weapon. They've existed pretty much from the end of the Roman era until almost the present. This one's got lovely fullering, beautiful maker's mark, horn grip, And these were used for slashing predominantly. There were also some for thrusting. They're very common across a large chunk of Asia. And all the way through World War I. This is a Russian bedboot from the Zlatust arsenal. This was made in about 1911, I believe. They were in use through World War I. This is again an artillerist's sidearm and utility tool. You'll notice that the rivets on these are basically one-sided. That's where the right hand goes. Arsenal marks. So, and this is double-edged, very capable of some ripping cuts, some slashing cuts, chopping of brush, whatever you need to do, gutting of the enemy. But again, we have a running style and a slow evolution of the design of the short sword. Moving completely out of that area over to Afghanistan. This is a different style. This is a Kora. It is halfway between a knife and a sword. It has a very thick tenon to the back, shell handle, brass guard, single-edged, used for slashing and stabbing. It's got a very strong point on it. Now, Southern Africa, this is an Ikla, used by originally the Zulu and later other Bantu peoples. It serves the same purpose. It's about the same length. It doesn't have as much cutting edge, but it's still got plenty of tip. It was used for thrusting, carried with a spear. It's got a forged socket. These are not really barbs for the thrust there, but if you catch something, they will help hook it like a shield, or they'll rip holes in someone as you pull past them. They still make these ceremonially. They don't use them much anymore, but they were in quite common use until about 100 years ago. Moving up in Africa to the Congo region, most people will not have seen one of these. This is an Ikakalaka. I believe that's how it's pronounced. There's variations. I've seen them more spatulate rather than hook. They're all about the same length. They have a very small grip by Western standards. You have to use 3 fingers and the other finger basically floats. Obviously, the initial thought is that this is for circumcising elephants, but this is actually made for hooking the opponent's spear, hooking their flesh, and you've got an edge there for a slash as well. It looks like a sci-fi weapon. I certainly wouldn't want to face one in combat. It's certainly more esoteric, has a very specific style, but it's a nice example of a short sword. So, short swords. They're in some ways easier to train with. They require less materials. As far as collecting goes, they have less cachet to them than, say, a claymore or a rapier. So it's often more favorable prices, especially on original pieces. They were easier to carry around than longer ones were. They were a lot more prevalent, and they're just there's a whole spectrum of them, and they all come in approximately the same length and many different styles, but all with the same purpose of causing a lot of damage to the other person. So you know the drill below, like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff, so we can do more of these videos. The website is Sharp Pointy Things. It's largely custom stuff and vintage stuff. It varies from time to time, but these videos are meant to be informative. Thank you very much.